All right. The next segment in the scratching seminar is going to be done by this man right here, the one and only DJ ATRAK. He's going to show his version of notation, of actually defining in writing how scratches look like. John, where's John? John Carluccio has a version as well. There can be many more versions. We're not telling you that these are the versions to accept by, but that's what we have SKRATCHCON for. We wanted a place where we can get everyone together and learn about everyone's ideas and maybe have some kind of, understanding what this all means.
Hello. Yep. Okay. All right, so I'm here to talk about my notation system for scratching. So to start off, I'll just tell you people the story about how I came up with this, because it'll give you an idea right away in which situations this type of system is useful. It was around, I think it was 96. I was trying to remember when this happened. I think it's around 96. I had a studio session that was coming up. I DJ for a group called Obscure Disorder. It's just like a rap group from Montreal. And this is like when we were starting to record some demos and stuff. And I had to go in studio and record the scratch solo on the song. And we were like on a tight budget and everything, and usually we'd go in studio, the MCs would take too much time, and by the time it was my turn, it was always like, okay, Track, you gotta hurry up, time is money, whatever. So I started preparing my solos at home before going to the studio. So this was like maybe the second or third time that I went into the studio to record scratches, and I prepared my solo like maybe a day or two before, except once I had like my scratches, once I decided what I was gonna do, I was just like, how am I going to remember this exactly? What if I forget, like, one of the scratches? So just instinctively, I just drew my scratches on the piece of paper the way I happened to see them in my head. I just drew them down, and, this way I got into the studio and looked at my sheet and remembered exactly which scratches to do. And it's only later on that I thought back and realized that I was like onto something with this whole notation thing. So I have a few slides here. Okay. This is the first one. This is the main idea here is to draw the scratches with the record movement as a function of time. So I don't usually draw the horizontal axis and the vertical axis like I did on top there. This is just to explain the principle, but basically the horizontal axis is time, and I divide it into beats and then into bars, and the vertical one, as you can see, is the position of the record. So what I drew on top here is simply a baby scratch, and then as for the crossfader motions, because this is just record movement, of course, the baby scratch obviously doesn't imply any crossfader cuts. As for the crossfader cuts, well, I thought since the crossfader is only used to add nuances or to add cuts or to complement the sound which is first created on the turntable, I decided to just notate the cuts from the crossfader as slashes on the line representing the record movement. So if you look, for example, at my one-click orbit here, these are the slashes on the line are clicks from the fader. And as you can see, I wrote that when I release the record, it's a double line. When I still have my hand on the record, it's a single line. So the little example that I have there is a baby scratch like this. Then I drew some chirps. And as you can see, the notation allows us to see when a scratch is started with the fader open or the fader closed. The chirp is started with the fader open, so obviously you don't see any clicks from the fader, any slashes on the line on the drawing of the chirp. Same thing for a one-click flare, which is started with the fader open. You can see it, and it's just a real easy way, I think, to understand scratches when you see them like this. Let's say someone's trying to explain to you a scratch. If he draws it in front of you, and you see like where the fader is, what you do with the record, where everything fits in together, it's just one way that I thought would be good to visualize scratches. So also, if the sound is cut off completely with the fader, I just don't draw the line at all. So for stabs, they look like that. And then at the end, I put a release. I'll go on to my second slide. Okay, this is a lot of people, whenever I mention to people that I have a scratch notation system, people will be like, where does the pitch of the scratch come in? Because let's say you're just doing a baby scratch. These two scratches that I'm about to do are different. There's a high-pitched baby scratch, or like a lower-pitched one. But what I wrote here is this translates with the angle of the line that I draw. If it's a high-pitched scratch, then it's like a push on the record. So there's a significant record movement over like a small period of time. So the line is at an important angle. Whereas if it's a low-pitched scratch like this, you're barely moving the record. So the line will be at a much smaller angle. And now for cymbals, well, I'd like to point out first of all that I've seen a few other scratch notation systems, and some of them, I find, in my opinion, use too many symbols and it becomes confusing. And I don't think we should have to learn how to read a notation system. I think we should be able to look at it and visualize and understand what it is. So the only cases where I use symbols is to avoid confusion. For example, the most obvious case, I think, is crabbing. So I drew a little crab to explain, where my symbol for the crab came from. Because let's say you're doing, for example, a 3-click crab flare like this. If you're thinking about just the clicks themselves or the movement on the record, it's basically the same thing as a 3-click flare without the crab. So to mark the difference, I add the symbol of the crab over the cuts that are crab. And the other symbols on the bottoms are just suggestions because for more experimental scratches, for example, or scratches with two hands, like the hydroplane, for example, it's tough to translate what the scratch is, so I just made up a few symbols as examples to notate less, scratches that are less usual. Also for a scratch that's fading out, I drew like a baby scratch that's fading out on the bottom, so this would just be like this. I just drew the symbol underneath for a decrescendo in music. It's like a symbol that's used in regular music notation. So I'm going to go on to examples of patterns right now. So here I just drew a bunch of patterns. And I'm just going to show you people, maybe, I've just been talking about theory all this time, but I guess if you see the scratches and I do them immediately, maybe it'll be easier for you people to understand what I'm talking about. Tears. This is on top here. I don't know where my laser pointer is, but on top I have tears. 2 tears up, 2 tears down, which is this scratch. I put 2 suggestions on how to notate this scratch because some people consider that this scratch is really, that there's a pause between the 2 tears, that it's really like this. Or other people, I consider, to the contrary, that there's the beginning of the first tear is lower pitched than the second one. It's more like this. So this is why I put 2 suggestions for the notation of tear scratches. And I have a scratch which is the same 2 tears forward, 2 tears backwards, but I add a click of a flare between each tear. It sounds like this. And I've tried to explain it to people, and I always had a hard time because I guess everything goes pretty fast, but I found that when I draw it with my notation system, it's a lot easier to visualize. For the transforms, the one that I draw was so I have my double line because I'm releasing the record, and then every transform on the fader is marked as a slash on the line, like, as I said before. 2-click orbits, like this. the one-click plus chirp combo that that D-Styles invented, as Kubert was saying earlier, this one here. I find it's also a lot easier to explain to people when I draw it like this. And then I have close to the bottom here, one click over, two tears up, and then three click crab flare down. See, it's always confusing when I say the name of the scratch, but then when it's drawn, it's easier to understand what the pattern looks like. So the scratch here that I did is like this. And finally, at the bottom, I put a circular three-click flare. This one. And this is also a scratch that I've shown to a few DJs in the past, and I remember like I showed it to a friend of mine in Montreal, and he'd be like, "Aren't you just doing a one-click? Because it kind of sounds like a one-click flare." But by drawing it with the system, you see where the second click appears while you change direction on the record. And finally, I know I'm rambling, this is the last one here. I made up like a two-bar partition, because this is really where I'm trying to head this whole speech towards. I think this notation is useful whenever you have to prepare a solo in advance. I was talking about studio sessions, that's an example. So I just made up out of nowhere like a little two-bar scratch partition, and I'm gonna do it here for you, and then I'll explain the advantage of drawing it rather than, writing the names of every single combo like I did underneath. So what this sounds like is this here. Once again. So let's say first of all, it takes up a lot less space to draw the scratch rather than to write like the name of every single combo. That's the first more obvious advantage. But there's one thing that's a bit more subtle that I wrote here. Let's say I made up this partition of 2 bars of scratching, and I wanted to remember them, and all I did was write the names of the combos. If I came back the next day and looked at all these names, nothing would tell me how long my chirp is, how long my 3-click is, on what beat this scratch is, whether it's upbeat or not. The notation system allows us to see where a scratch fits in on a beat. For example, let's say you have a pattern. I'll come back to D-Styles, 1-click orbit followed by a chirp, this one here. There's like an infinity of ways almost to do this pattern. Let's say you invent this pattern and you want to remember it. So you write down the name. You write down 1-click orbit followed by a chirp. If you come back a few days later and you look at it, at what you wrote down just with words, there's no telling whether you're doing this or this one or these are all patterns that are 1-click orbits followed by chirps. But with the notation, you see where the scratch fits in relation to the beat, in relation to the bar. So you can make all these nuances more obvious because you see where the scratch fits in on a beat. And finally, just to finish off, I'm going to give one more example of how this is useful. A little story, something happened a few weeks ago. I was in class. I guess I wasn't paying too much attention because I thought of a scratch. I was thinking about stuff, and I just thought of a new combo that I could do. And I was like, I'll never remember this when I come home. So I wrote the scratch down in my agenda with this notation system. And that night I came home, but I ended up just practicing some juggles. And I forgot about that scratch. The next day I was practicing, and I was like, hold on, I had a new combo I wanted to try. So I went to get my agenda, and I looked at it, and I did the scratch, and it sounded like this. And it actually worked, and it's thanks to this notation system that I was able to remember it. So I was talking to Prime Cuts also. I was talking to Prime Cuts earlier in the dressing rooms, and I know he pointed out the fact that this system would be useful for someone who would like be able to envision scratches but might not have the ability to recreate the scratches. So if someone is able to think of a combo but maybe isn't quick enough to do it, he can write it down and show it to his friend could do it. I think it just adds a whole new dimension to the way of making up patterns and keeping an inventory of patterns and orchestrating the patterns together. So that's it.
Yo, 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 yo.